Will begin, and I guess people, if they come late, they'll just catch on. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the AI and Society seminar. This is rescheduled from last week. Our speaker will be Dr. Nirav Ajmeri, talking about prosociality and fairness in intelligent agents. Nirav has had very long ties with NC State. He was a PhD student here. After he finished his PhD, he was also a master's student for a few hours and got his master's. And then he was a postdoc for about a year and a half or so. But he's been at the University of Bristol for just about 3 years. I think it was around early November that he left during COVID. And he's been doing very well there in terms of looking at AI, looking at ethical aspects, problems of AI, looking at applications of AI for social good and so on. So he's going to tell us about some of the things that he's been doing while there. Okay, I'll go on mute.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Muninder. I still have NC State Cup, and that is what I'm using so far. Okay, so today I'll talk about prosociality and fairness in intelligent agents. I think this is a lot of joint work with Muninder and Cherting, who is in the call, and Huigo also, and Pradeep Murukanaya, who is at Delft. And then some of my students are contributing on this set of work. We still don't have results, but I still have some slides on what we are doing right now. I was hoping to get some results this week, but we're still running some experiments. Okay, so let us get going. So I'll be talking about ethics broadly. And when we think about ethics, what is we are thinking about is systemizing or defending or recommending concepts of right and wrong. So we're thinking about what is right and what is wrong. And this is founded, if you think about the classical theory of ethics and thinking about people, how people in Greece lived earlier or during early times. You're thinking about good behavior of your own, and then we start thinking about good behavior in a household, and then we start thinking about good behavior in the society. So it's taking it forward, your good behavior and by yourself, good behavior within the family or household, and then good behavior outside of family as well. If we go further, there is the concept of prosociality. So we're thinking about prosociality as an extent to which a person's circumstance-driven or context-driven behavior relates to one beneficiary or one or more beneficiary. And then we could be thinking about how it gives a positive societal outcome. So that is broadly thinking about what prosociality would mean. I'll give some examples to make it more concrete. But you can think about, say, if you're driving a car and then there is a person trying to merge through, you may stop and then let that person merge, right? So that would become a prosocial behavior. You are not thinking of, so you don't gain anything as other than, say, gaining some karma, but then it benefits somebody else. So that would be an example of a prosocial behavior. Or here the photo is like some people are helping others get food during COVID, for instance. You might have heard about ethical dilemmas, and you might have seen photos about the trolley problem. Here, the idea is that there is a train, and if the train goes straight, it might kill some people, and there is a lever, and if you are the person who has to make a decision whether to pull this lever and make the train go right, and possibly instead of, say, killing 5 people, you end up killing 1 person. So broadly, we're thinking about choices, but there is no obviously good choice. And a lot of times when you're thinking about ethical dilemmas, we're thinking about extreme scenarios. But then these dilemmas occur in mundane scenarios as well. For instance, say you have a phone call and we are in a meeting, whether you answer that phone call or not. So you have a dilemma. So you don't have to necessarily think about extreme scenarios, and dilemmas happen in mundane scenarios as well. And when we start thinking about those scenarios in mundane settings, we start thinking about that ethics is inherently a multi-agent concern. Going further, I talked about prosociality a bit. Here is an example, so say from Google Maps, for instance. Just picking up random points to see what it takes, how long it takes. So this was some backyard bistro, and then you're driving to 890 Old Drive, which is EB2's address. Now you see three routes, and one takes 13 minutes, another takes 13 minutes, and the third one takes 14 minutes. Which route would you take? Now, it depends on a lot of different things. The current agents, what they'll do is try to maximize experience for an individual. When they're taking into account experiences for others, it still tries to maximize the experience for the person whose agent it is. So here we might think that, say, the route which takes 14 minutes may not be the best route. But what happens that the other route, which takes 13 minutes, has a school, right? So in that case, the route that takes 14 minutes could be better, considering that it could be school hours, and then there could be kids who could be, say, getting on a bus, or say people might be dropping their kids. And so if there is a trade-off between safety of other people and then your time. So that is what you would want to think about. How do you consider taking pro-social actions in this way? There have been other scenarios wherein, say maps would route trucks through villages. Possibly that saves time, but then it disturbs sleep for people who were sleeping at night in a village. So we need to think about such scenarios. So you not just think about people who are using the agent, but who could get affected by the use of agent. And not about agents, but any software that you develop in general. There could be other scenarios, like here there is an example that you click a photograph and you share it on Facebook, for instance, or share it on Instagram. Now here the trade-offs would be that you think about your own pleasure, but then it could be that some other people may not like it, or some person could be privacy conscious and who may not like it. So there are trade-offs. We not just have to think about ourselves, but we want to think about others as well. So some brief concepts that I'll possibly use here. So I'll talk about socio-technical systems a little. And when we're talking about socio-technical systems, we're thinking about these as cyber-physical systems, which include multiple stakeholders. And this includes both humans, organizations, and agents, and they interact with each other. We'll possibly also talk about some bits about norms. And when we're thinking about norms, we're thinking about something that governs the interaction of multiple stakeholders, or here specifically two stakeholders. An example of a norm could be a commitment norm, wherein, say, conference attendees are committed to keep wearing masks. Or there could be a prohibition norm that says students are prohibited from using their laptops during exam, if it is a paper exam, pen and paper kind of exam. Then there is another concept which is of deviation. Deviation, the way we think about it is as a perceived violation of a norm. Say somebody is not wearing a mask, you'll think of that they are violating the commitment of wearing a mask. Now, there could be explanations given for a deviation. Another concept is social context, and this is about circumstances in which an interaction takes place. I talked a bit about values in a couple of previous slides. So we're thinking about values as what are guiding principles of humans. And when I'm thinking about ethics, I think about ethics as subsumed in the theory of values. And in some of the work, we also consider privacy as a value, or you can also think about fairness as a value as well. Okay, so the conception of ethics in society with agents looks like this. So we have a stakeholder who is interacting with other stakeholder. And we think of a society where each stakeholder has an agent who is representing them as well, and who is supporting them in taking decisions or interacting in the society. And we think of this as a micro society, and these agents reflect the autonomy of the stakeholders on whose behalf they are interacting. In my works or the works with my collaborators, we have been calling these agents as socially intelligent personal agents. So these agents help stakeholder, but they are socially intelligent in a sense that they consider other stakeholders as well who could possibly get affected. I mentioned socio-technical systems. You don't have to look at this complicated figure and read everything, but the broader idea here is that we have a social tier wherein principles interact. When I'm saying principles, I'm talking about humans or organizations. For instance, say Amanul as a student interacts with NC State Library. So a human interacting with organization, or say Amanul interacts with shirting in the lab. So that is human interacting with another human. So humans or organizations interact in a social tier. In the technical tier, they are represented by agents who also communicate with them, each other. For instance, Amanul has an account on University of Library, and then Amanul via his account interacts with the library system, for instance. When a socio-technical system is designed, you're typically thinking about some stakeholders who identify requirements for a socio-technical system. You think about the stakeholders identifying what are the values of the principles. You think about what are the preferences over these values. And then these stakeholders further specify what are the norms that govern the interactions. They also think about assumptions, mechanisms, and metrics for the realization in agents. When we are thinking about ethics and fairness in socio-technical systems, there are typically two aspects. One aspect is about agents. So how could we make better agents? So that would be one aspect. And then other aspect is about societal aspects, like how can we build better socio-technical systems as a whole. When we are thinking about the agent aspect, we are thinking about how could agents help select decisions during dilemma scenarios, or how could agents consider virtues, or again, thinking about decision making in dilemma, or how could agents help people live in a society. When we're thinking about societal aspects, we're thinking about interactions that happen between multiple stakeholders in the society. We're thinking about what kind of standards we can specify for, say, good behavior. We're thinking about how could we verify whether or not the behaviors or actions are good. And we're thinking about learning from each other. In the current works, like a lot of times, like the previous literature has focused mainly on the agent aspect and misses out on the societal aspect. So this is what we have been trying to do, like incorporate both agent aspect and the societal aspect. I mentioned about socially intelligent agent earlier in a figure. What we are thinking is like a socially intelligent agent is an agent which adapts to social context, and then it supports meeting expectations of various stakeholders. What it does is it seeks to balance the needs of a primary stakeholder on whose behalf the agent is interacting. And then it could also consider other stakeholders who could get affected by agent's action. For instance, say I am using map related agent, my map agent tells me, or say my navigation agent tells me that there are two routes, route A and B. If you take route A, you reach your destination in 1 hour. If you take route B, you reach your destination in 45 minutes. But then if you take route B, there could be other people who could get affected, for instance. So you would want to think about primary users and secondary users as well, or other stakeholders who could get affected. The challenges here are for an agent is how do we identify what are the values which are of interest to a stakeholder or an agent or a multi-agent system as a whole. So identifying values is challenging. The other aspect is how do we incorporate these values in agents. The third challenge is how do we understand values and relate it to certain contexts, right? So values are not fixed. So a lot of previous works or a lot of other research, they consider that values are fixed. But then that idea is slightly narrow. Values would depend on the context or circumstances in which people are interacting. So we want to think about values in context. The other thing that we would want to think about is how do we communicate our values to others, right? So how would other people know about our values, or how do others tell us about our values, other people's values? And once you know values, how do you reason about those values? And potentially when you know people's values and reason about those values, you could potentially revise the norms of the society. So starting from an individual agent, you're trying to think about a multi-agent system. So this was one representation that we started with. And the idea was that as agent needs to know who the stakeholders are, what their goals are. For instance, for a mapping or navigation agent, the goal would be to make sure that the user reaches the destination, provide a route that is appropriate for the user to reach from the source to the destination. You would want to think about values that the user has. Say whether they want to think about safety, maybe they want to save some fuel, and so on and so forth. Now, there is also a world model which has context and actions. Context, you're thinking about, say, driving during nighttime, for instance, and during nighttime, you may not want to take route A compared to route B. And then depending on the context, you take some actions. So which route you select could be an action, which could be suggested by the agent. There are various norms that govern or that apply to various contexts. And if there are deviations from the norms, there could be sanctions that could apply. Considering all of these, your agent would want to select some action. So you have a decision module. Now we expanded this in Scherting's work, wherein we also consider emotion aspect, wherein you have emotions and appraisal. And then we also include explanation in addition to just taking an action. So take this action and further explain that action. We talked a bit about values. So when we're thinking about values, we're thinking about what is important to us in life. And here, what values, so there are various aspects here. When we're thinking about values, we are thinking about standards of criteria for correctness, for instance. We think the values are ordered by importance. For instance, somebody may prefer safety over privacy in certain aspects. They help prioritize our actions, the actions that we want to take. And they are also linked to affect. And values also refer to our goals. And then values transcend context. So they are not fixed. They depend on the context or circumstances in which we are acting. How do you incorporate value in an agent model? This is in a diagram or figure for an intelligent agent. And this represents a contextual model of an intelligent agent. Here, the idea is about an intelligent ringer, which helps a user to click. The agent decides when to ring or not, depending on the user's needs. Now, the users may have various goals. Say, for instance, they want to be reachable to their family members. So here we are thinking about the value of welfare of others. They also may have a goal to work uninterrupted. Here, so in that case, they are thinking about ambition of themselves. And people may have preferences, or the users may have preference that they prefer welfare of others over ambition. So this previous work by Pradeep and Muninder, which they came up with a methodology on how to incorporate values in agents. And then there's a subsequent work that we had wherein we include values further. So this would be how you can start incorporating values in an agent model. So you want to think about various goals, you want to think about the values people have, and then depending on context, what values people prefer over other values. Subsequently, there would be values that you would want to relate to social norms. So here is a slightly different example. So here, think about an example of values in a location sharing app. Say Frank is a high school student, and Frank uses an application via which Frank tells his mother where he is. So he checks in on phone. So whenever Frank is outside of home, Frank will check in. From that, Frank's mother, Grace, knows where Frank is. Frank is committed to sharing location with Grace. If you're thinking about values, Frank's mother prefers Frank's safety. So that is a value that Frank's mother has, Grace has. Frank gets pleasure and recognition when Frank checks in. So Frank visits various places and he checks in and possibly gets likes, so he gets pleasure from that or recognition from that, depending on what scenario and where he is checking in. Let's say Frank is visiting Aunt Hope. Aunt Hope may prefer privacy. So consider that Aunt Hope is privacy conscious and she prefers privacy. Now, when Frank is meeting Hope, what would happen is Frank is committed to Mother Grace, and then Frank would want to share location, but Hope prohibits Frank from sharing location. So there is Frank's dilemma in terms of like what sharing policy to select. And if an agent was helping Frank select policy for location sharing, should Frank share with everybody? So if Frank shares with everybody, he gets pleasure, or he could share only with Grace, and then that promotes safety value for Grace. Or he could share with nobody, and then there is privacy promoted for Hope. So there would be some dilemma scenarios here, and how would agent help? So that is what we would want to think about. So how we tried doing it in one way was like, say, what an agent can do is try to identify what are the relevant actions which are appropriate in the scenario, and then select an action which could maximize social experience and maximize fairness for the stakeholders. How to do that? What you do is try to identify who are the stakeholders involved in the current scenario. You think about what are the values and preferences they have, and then you rank various actions. I'll talk a little bit more about this. Once you get this, you select some action. When you select an action, others observe that action. And then they give you some feedback. Say, hey, this was not the right thing, or this was a good thing that you did. From that, you store that in your experience. So thinking about learning from experience. So as and when you act, you get feedback from other people, and then you store that in your experience. And it is the same way that agents are acting. In one of the previous works, what we did was we adapted multi-criteria decision-making method, which was called YCOR. There are various methods that you could possibly use, but we used YCOR in one of the previous works. What YCOR does is it help selecting actions, balancing utilitarianism. That is, we're thinking about aggregated experience for the society, and then it looks at egalitarianism, and which is you're trying to maximize the minimum. And what we do is balance the two. So the idea would be you get values and preferences, and then get payoffs for each value preference. And then you determine the worst case and best case payoffs, and then compute Manhattan distance. Manhattan distance typically maps to utilitarianism. And then you can also compute Chebyshev distance that maps to egalitarianism. And here, what we are trying to do is aggregate these two, and then choose an action. Now, this is one way, and this is not the only way which could be fair or ethical. The challenge is determining what would be a relevant ethical principle to apply. So so that was a complicated scenario. Let's make it simple here. There are three people, Jess, Dan, and Alex, and they have to go out to get some food. So there is pancake restaurant, there is a pasta place, and there is a pizza place. If they go to a pancake restaurant, they get, say Jess is very happy, gets 10 payoff. Dan gets happiness of 10, but Alex is not so happy, gets a payoff of 2, or say happiness of 2 going to pancake. There's another place that they could go to. They could go to a pasta place, and everybody gets 7 happiness. So everybody's okay with going to a pasta place. The other scenario is they can go to a pizza restaurant, wherein Jess gets 5 happiness, Dan gets 5 happiness, but Alex is very, very happy and gets 10 happiness. So I'll pause here, and then could people say how many people would think that pancake would be the place where we should go, or pasta could be the place that we could go, or pizza would be the place that we could go?
Based on these numbers, or based on if you like?
Based on these numbers,
Okay.
or feel free to mute and then say, I don't see people, so I won't see any hands or anything. Or maybe people can use the raise hand. Say how many people think that they should, just Dan and Alex could go to the pancake place. And I can count. I see way above, like one person. So one person thinks pancake. Okay. And then one more person. Okay. Jay says pancake as well. So two people for pancake.
Okay.
So
I learned a lot of things about these people, and they're totally inegalitarian.
But
I'd be very cautious when I hang out with them.
But it could be that these people like pancakes, right? So it may not be about egalitarianism, but it could be about pancakes. Okay, so let's do the same thing for pasta.
I think people have to bring their hands down. Yeah.
So how many people think that they should go to pasta?
Yeah, I would go for pasta, and I think people are raising their hands too.
Yeah, so I see 1, 2, 3.
I can raise my
4, 5. I see a lot of hands now, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. So 6 people think that they should go to a pasta place, right? And then anybody who thinks that they should go to pizza?
I think Amanul needs to bring his hand down, right?
So
No,
Manul thinks it is
Manu
pizza.
voted with the other side. Yeah.
Okay, say Hansel and Bill say they should go get pizza. Okay, so if you're thinking about, so here the what was happening is, if you're thinking about pancake, this becomes more about social welfare, or say utilitarianism. We're thinking about pasta, we're trying to aggregate two type of policies. And then if you're thinking about pizza, we're thinking about lifting up the minimum experience of somebody who was worst off in other scenarios. Could somebody say, I think Bill's hand is up, is that? So Bill, why would you think that pizza would be a good scenario? If you would want to unmute.
First, it's good to have diversity in the answers.
Sorry?
I said first, it's good to have diversity in the responses. But seriously, I was assuming a few things in the background, but I thought pizza would be the more Rawlsian response, where some people have more, but 5 seems like a fairly good amount. Again, it's not really defined here what would be enough to sort of satisfy your needs, but assuming 5 is, then everybody's in a pretty good position, even though we allow some to be in a better position. Which is not totally inconsistent with a proper understanding of utilitarianism, but that's a different discussion.
But how's it Rawlsian though? So in this case,
because of the difference principle that you can allow and should allow in certain cases some individuals or groups to have a greater amount of goods, as long as everybody is above a minimum line of what they need. I don't know if 5 is it. I was just assuming for the sake of my answer. Maybe it's 3 or 4.
So that is how I was thinking, that pizza would become, if you're thinking about Rawlsian approach, pizza would be a Rawlsian scenario, wherein, like, say, if we take other scenarios, Alex possibly gets just a 2 and 10 could be extreme egalitarianism, for instance. I could be wrong in my thinking, or these numbers don't add up correctly, but the idea that I had was that we could have such numbers, and then there would, so if you apply one scenario or one ethical principle, you arrive at one decision making. If you apply some other scenario or ethical principle, you arrive at a different decision. But then the next thing is, what if they have to go for lunch for 3 consecutive days? So people who thought pancake is the correct answer, would you still go for pancake 3 consecutive days? Like, so Weber, what do you think?
I would not go then.
Would you change your response, or what would it look like if you're going 3 different days?
Yeah, maybe like a diverse option for if I'm going consecutive days. Not the same option, definitely.
Right.
So I think Weber was thinking about the just that he wants to have variation in his meal. But if it was 3 consecutive years, once a year, right? Doesn't have to be consecutive days, like you're eating the same food. Sit on like November 3rd every year, you go with your friends.
Yeah. Yeah, I think pancake maximizes the total happiness, but again, it comes at the cost of one person's happiness. Like Alex is not happy.
I think, yes. So here, what would happen is, I think if you say every year we decide that we go to a restaurant and then we do the maximum happiness, say everybody's happy except one person, so let's keep going to pancake every year. Maybe yes, in that case, what would happen is Alex continues to get to experience. Now, if you're going to pasta place as well, Muninder, do you think that you can still go to pasta every time, or you would do something else?
I think that if you have repeated interactions, then you could just let each person have a shot at it, right? And there's fairness also at that level.
Right. So yeah, so that was the idea. I think the way I've been thinking is like, so if in a lot of decision making, when people are applying fairness principles, we're thinking about like one shot decision. But I think something that we should consider is like how many times the decision is being made. If there is multiple times the decision is being made, we can consider various principles to apply, and then we need not just apply, say, egalitarianism or utilitarianism or some combination of the two. If you're going 3 different days, instead of going to pasta place 3 like on consecutive days, like 21, 21, 21, and getting 63, you can still get 63 happiness over 3 days from going to pancake one day, when Jess and Dan are very, very happy, and Alex at least gets to eat something, and then go to a pasta place where everybody is okay, and then have Alex very happy getting pizza the 3rd day. So we want to think about what principle to apply. Hey, Dr. Vatsua, you have something?
Yeah, you don't have to say doctor.
Yeah, sorry.
You can call me Raju. Question for what Muninder said, right? One is going on consecutive days. Probably this happiness doesn't change, maybe fixed. But if you are saying every year,
Correct.
the preferences might change.
Right.
So are you not going to change these values?
Yes. So I think the idea would be that if these numbers are getting to change, so if these numbers change the next day or say multiple years, we take the current numbers into account. So that would become a slightly different problem, but we'll have to think about the current preferences that they have instead of looking at their past preferences. But if the preferences have changed, we may still want to look at what experience they got last time, and then if we want to say make sure that their overall experience after multiple interactions is also good, we want to switch it. Say next year, say first year we go to a pasta place, but then these numbers have changed subsequently, we would want to think about it differently the next time, and that is what I'll say. But we want to think about what each person got as experience previous time, irrespective of a specific scenario or actions or places. You think about what experience they got last time, what experience they are getting now, irrespective of the specific restaurants, for instance. Would that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the interest of time, maybe I'll go fast slightly. So so the challenge here is there are a lot of ethical principles. There is from deontology, wherein you have egalitarianism, proportionalism, or Kantian, and then there are teleological principles, which include consequentialism and virtue. And then the challenge is, how do we know which principle is appropriate in which scenario? I don't have an answer. This needs to be thought about for every circumstance, and then has to be reasoned about and explained why this is an appropriate principle to apply, instead of just saying that we applied coalition principle of or justice principle and then say this is the right action. We would want to explain why. One thing that we are thinking right now is about the responsibility, and this maps to prosociality. This is something we're doing right now, and if you're thinking about existing works, most reasoning related approaches are talking about explicit agreements or explicit responsibility. Just to give you an example what explicit responsibility and implicit responsibility would mean. Explicit responsibility is, say you and your partner adopt a dog. Now you are responsible for taking care of the dog. So that is an explicit responsibility that you have. And then there could be implicit responsibility, wherein say you see a dog on street. What could happen is you could either run away, you don't have the responsibility for the dog, but then you can get food for the dog. So that would be an implicit responsibility. So how could we have agents think about responsibility? And that would map to taking pro-social action. And then the idea is, can implicit responsibilities be learned as social norms over time? So we're doing something on these lines. And one of my students is working on it. What we're trying to do is like have agents use DQN and reward shape via reward shaping their learning. The idea is when they're acting in an environment, they classify all actions, and then via these classification identify which actions were responsibility related actions. And during responsibility related actions via reward shaping, we're thinking, how could we give intrinsic rewards to these agents so that they learn that these are responsibility related actions, and then they can figure those out as norms further. Now, this is how the environment looks like. These are agents, like the pinkish boxes. They have two different things, like one is health and energy, and then there are some berries. These agents can move around in the environment, and they can pick up berries. They can eat those berries. As they eat berries, they get some energy and health. And then they can also give berries to others. What we're trying to see is how could agents learn to give berries to others when they don't need it. And the idea would be about short-term rewards and the longer-term rewards. Say I give my berry to somebody else who needs it more right now, and then possibly thinking about longer term that someday I may need berries when I cannot walk. Somebody else can bring me berries. When you're thinking about such actions, overall happiness or overall society is doing good, and then individually people are also doing good. I was hoping to have some results here, but we don't have results. So maybe I'll share when I have results. A subsequent work we are thinking here is like, does everybody in the society need to be pro-social, for instance? Like, so do we want 100% of society or 100% of agents to be pro-Lesian, for instance? Does it bring a good aggregate happiness and least fairness, or do we want, or is there a sweet spot wherein say you only have 10% people who are pro-social or they think about others, and that brings a very good experience to everybody, and then there's fairness in the society as well. So that is another thing that we're trying to do. Now, once you know once you have done certain actions, what you would want to do is explain those actions as well. And this is how you typically do. You perform an action, others observe that action, and then you reveal why you did something. Often when you're revealing certain things or explaining certain things, you're revealing part of the context that was not observed by the other person. For instance, in the phone call scenario, so if I answer a phone call now, if I'm explaining it to you, I may tell it was my wife who was trying to call me. So it includes some context which was not observed. Now, when you're generating explanations, there are few other things that you would want to think about. Who is the receiver of the explanation? Would they be okay getting this explanation, or would you want to revise that explanation when you're giving it to them? And some of the things that Shirting has done is consider people's values, and then considering people's values, you customize that experience. I'll point you to look at Shirting's dissertation on how to use values and explanation. Now, evaluating such things is non-trivial. So what we have done so far is created simulation environments, like similar to this foraging environment. And mostly we're doing simulations. So we, in one of these works, like we're in generating explanations, what we had was a ringer environment wherein there are people in social circles, family, co-worker, friends, and strangers, and they're moving to various places, say emergency room or home, library, meeting, party. And then there are various type of agent societies, and they're learning strategies. Either they could be learning via sanctions. The previous works has looked at ways of learning via sanctions. I take an action and then you think whether this is right or wrong, and then give me a feedback. Or it could be that you learn by you take an action and then you give a feedback, and another person would think about, okay, what would I have done if I was in a similar situation, considering the explanation given, and then give a feedback. And what our results look like was like when we are sharing explanations, we get much higher social experience. We learn norms which are robust, or the society learns norms which are robust, is mostly adopted by a lot of agents. And then we also, I think these are results from a different scenario, but it's similar, wherein like agents are moving at various places and checking in. And then here we're looking at policy based on YCOR, combining egalitarianism and utilitarianism. And what we've looked at was when we are combining the egalitarianism approach and utilitarianism approach via YCOR, we get high fairness. So these are the things that I've been doing. I think I can tell about individual works. Feel free to write to me. And I can also introduce you to the people who are directly involved in working on these. But in summary, what I would want to say is ethics inherently involves looking beyond one's self-interest. And when you're thinking about fairness as well, you want to think about multiple people. And these considerations apply not just in extreme scenarios such as trolley problems, but in mundane settings as well, when you have multiple users or multiple agents interacting. And then you can think about that agents could help people navigate better norms or navigate social norms in the society and support selecting appropriate actions. What are the opportunities and directions? So you would want to think about like how could you promote justice or fairness at the community level while you're making decisions at individual level. So you're making your own decision and you're thinking about fairness, but individually, but does that actually support fairness at the community level? The other thing that you would want to think about is how could intelligent agents infer people's values? How do we elicit values? So for instance, like you interact with ChatGPT, you can provide some context to ChatGPT, but like can a conversational agent learn your value? Can the conversation agent learn that value preference for values unintrusively without even asking you? So you interact with it and then you learn, say this person prefers this value, and then your agent could refine the response. So something that we are trying to do right now is have a wrapper around LLMs. So when you get you give out some input to say any large language model, you think you can customize their response, the question you're getting, revise the question, get it to the LLM. When you get an output, you see whether or not it maps to the person's values, and then revise it, or say reprompt the LLM and then give it back to the user. But it's still early stages, we're still thinking about it. The next part is like thinking about how do we aggregate people's values or preferences, considering the social context in which you're taking actions. How do you incorporate ideas, say emotions and guilt and consent and prosociality? So how could you think about these concepts together as well? Another line of work is how do you formally verify decisions align with the socio-technical specification and people's or stakeholders' requirements. So these are also quite open problems, some of these. Something that setting has looked at. So how could you explain decisions to other users, but yet preserve privacy, because when you're explaining, you might include some private information. So how could you preserve privacy? And then a lot of times people ask about, so you can't really evaluate such systems without simulation, or say without real data. And how do we get real data? So how could we create realistic data? And probably using generative models, you can have representative data of real world and without any privacy or finance related constraints. So that is also an open area if somebody is interested in slightly different aspect of multi-agent systems. Thank you. That was my last slide, and I would like to acknowledge my collaborators. Thanks. I'm happy to take questions.
Yes, Soyoung is going to run the show.
Okay.
So
yeah, if anyone has any question, just raise your hand. Yeah, we got a few. Aman can go first.
Okay. Hey, hi Nirav. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. This is really interesting and a very relevant and timely research, I would say. So my question is, pro-sociality in general is a complicated concept, and we can go on complicating these scenarios, right? There can be nested scenarios in which you may not be considering stakeholders, which may indirectly be impacted. So just to complicate one of your examples, just to get your view on it. So you talk about the cutting into a lane car example, wherein if I'm a pro-social agent, I would let somebody cut into the lane. But one of the problem in this could be that I'm acting in an anti-social way for the people behind me, because I'm slowing down the traffic. So in a world where all the cars are, let's say, autonomous agents, I can imagine a situation where every car, knowing that all the other cars are pro-social, would want to cut into a lane of, let's say, there's an exit which has a huge queue. Every agent would want to cut into, like, get ahead and cut into the lane, right? So how do you see such situations, or if there's research out there that talks about such nested kind of situations?
Yeah, thanks, Amanul. I think, yes, I wanted to put that example specifically because I think, so when you allow somebody else, you're likely to have other people behind you. So you're not, so those are also other stakeholders. You're not just thinking about the person who was waiting there, but you think about others who could possibly get affected. Now there would be some ways on how to aggregate preferences. Maybe you think about only the car immediate behind you, and then one car which is waiting, and then do some math around it. And you can think about diminishing rewards for people which are much more behind. So that is how you look at. The other point was about if everybody is pro-social, right? So that is what I was trying to get to, wherein I think we were doing some experiments to look at, like, in scenarios. In this scenario, say you have just 10% of people who are pro-social. What happens? Do we need everybody to be pro-social? You only need, say, only a minority to be pro-social, and still you get a very good experience overall. And people who were worst off, their experiences were lifted up. So you don't, I am not saying that everybody has to be pro-social. I think we'll have to do some experiments. We'll have to look at scenarios, specific scenarios, and then see what works best in that scenario. So that is how I would put it as.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
Vaibhav?
Yeah, hi. So I have a generic question. Like, you talked about responsible agents, and don't you think if you make agents responsible to do certain actions, I know that is good, but will it not take away their autonomy? And if it does, so how to balance out things?
So I was thinking about here as, like, agents who are helping people. And then you are in certain scenarios, you think about, you're thinking about whether your agent can say, your agent can tell you, say, hey, Weber, you can consider adopting this dog, for instance, and or say, you can think about long-term and shorter-term reward. Maybe adopting the dog may bring you happiness. Maybe I'm stretching the example though, but in the other scenario, wherein you had this, wherein say, hey, Weber, why don't you give your berry to the other person who needs it more? And possibly the longer term reward would be, say, you help somebody now and possibly later they help you. So it may not be necessary that that specific person helps you, but somebody else may help you. If, for instance, say NC State students come in every year, say batch of 2023, they go and help people who will be coming in 2024. You have pickup services from, say, Maitri to pick up international students, right? So next year, the next batch, so who were people who were picked up from the airports, they arrange pickups for their subsequent years, and that carries forward. So that would be kind of responsibility event I'm thinking about. You don't necessarily have to pick them up or say provide food in other scenarios, but then how could you have agents learn certain responsibilities which are not explicit, and that can lead you to greater good. Also, it may benefit you or others in various scenarios. So that's how I am thinking about it, not taking away their autonomy. It is always so when we have the conception of socially intelligent personal agent, you're thinking that this agent can tell you what you could do. It could possibly explain you what could be what could happen, but then it depends on you whether or not you would want to do that. So that is how I'll see it as agent supporting human taking decisions.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
William, you can go.
Thank you. Hi, Nirav.
Hey.
Thanks for a very informative and insightful talk. My question is, the way you're thinking about prosociality, do you think a lot of it has to do with sort of maximizing efficiency in the social system? So I'm thinking of like a sort of a broadly market-based approach, which includes not just economic capital, but social capital. Is the goal to increase efficiency in how we interact with each other and the results we produce?
So one thing I've been thinking is like a lot of works is in game theory or economics. They would think about maximizing or getting the optimal solution. What I've been thinking recently is you don't always need the most optimal answer. Sometimes suboptimal actions could be satisfactory. So how could we select even suboptimal actions, but which are satisfactory for everybody? For instance, say in this scenario, there could be actions which could be suboptimal, but then people are happy. They may not be very happy. Here, although the pizza example would map to religion approach, but it could be some other restaurant could map to religion approach, but pizza could still be okay scenario to have people's happiness. So that is how I'm thinking about it. So not get the complete optimal solution, but even sometimes suboptimal space. Not completely bad, but say not the most optimal solution on the Pareto front, but good enough for everybody in the society. So that is how I'm thinking. But does it answer your question, or it is?
Yeah, I think so. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I think we are out of time anyway, so maybe this is a good time to stop.
Okay. Yeah, thanks Nirav for your presentation, and yeah, we can close this meeting.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
I guess we
Thanks a
can,
lot, everyone.
yeah, give Nirav a virtual applause, or yeah.
Yeah.
All right. See you all later.
Thank you.
Bye.